Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Hey, Earth Keepers. As you know, this podcast deals often with the importance of knowing, loving, and caring for our places. Indeed, I suspect most of us would agree that to be a good relative in the family of creation, we must become rooted in the ecologies of the places where we live. What happens, though, when people are forced out of their places by circumstances beyond their control, like war, famine, climate disaster, or political persecution? How does a person, or a family, or a whole community for that matter, survive the trauma of being uprooted and displaced? It's a question we need to consider now more than ever, given the growing number of displaced people in the world today. According to the UN Refugee Agency, the total number of refugees today has more than tripled in the last decade alone. And with the inevitable increase in climate change refugees to come in the near future, countless more people will find themselves facing the trauma of displacement. Now, I want you to meet a brave and creative friend of mine, Hale Gencel, who is trying to make a difference in the lives of such people. I met her years ago when I lived in Turkey, which tends to be a transition country where many refugees go as a temporary stopping point on their way to their new homes in countries elsewhere. As a mental health professional and an artist, Hale has created ways to use art and expressive activities to help address trauma and to build resilience among displaced people. And importantly, she helps teach and empower community leaders within refugee populations to use these democratized approaches to healing. And that's what we'll talk about in this episode. And just a note, Hale works with refugees from all over the Middle East and North Africa, but for security reasons, we won't mention specific nationalities. So, Hale, my friend, it is so good to be with you again. We have talked off and on over the years, and I did some figuring, and I realized that we have been friends for 25 years. I met you in 1999 when I moved to Turkey to live there.
Yeah, it has been quite a long time. Thank you for having me, Forrest. Wonderful to be here with you.
Tell us about the work that you do in general terms to orient our listeners to you.
I mainly work with refugees and do psychosocial support groups and with population of men, women, and young adults, and for them to process their trauma and for adaptation.
Now, I want to focus on your work with refugees because it has so much to do with a lot of the themes that Earth Keepers care about, which is relationship to place and identity. But I do want to talk about another significant work that you've been involved in, and you have been pretty instrumental in helping to change Turkish society on a fundamental level, especially when it comes to attitudes about psychology, about trauma, about the need to seek help for emotional healing. Talk about that work and specifically talk about the talk show that you have been part of over the years.
I have been hosting a talk show for over 2 years, and the motivation first came up with an idea like, I've been trying to help the refugees for so many years. Then I just stopped. I said, so what do I do for my people, for my country? So that question came up to my mind. What can I do? How can I use my gifts or talents to serve my country? Then we started the program, creating awareness of the psychological needs and really just telling them, it's okay. You're a human being. You may have problems. If you know what it is, then you can deal with it. And by the way, you're not alone in this. So that's what we try to do. And then I hosted many colleagues from the field, psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers, trying to create that awareness in the community.
You have worked with a lot of people groups, actually, who probably have similar resistances or lack of knowledge about the healing power of therapy and psychological approaches. But I think you've done a really interesting job in that you don't come at helping people with psychology directly. You've developed a lot of ways to talk about healing that aren't laced with psychological jargon that might put people off or confuse them. You really democratized, in many ways, the strengths of psychology. I wonder if you could talk about, first of all, who are some of those people groups, and tell us why they've left their home countries in the first place to become refugees or immigrants.
Those are people groups mainly from Middle East and some from North Africa due to persecution they received from homeland because of their beliefs, because of their choices in life. And they are not immigrants, they are refugees. There's a forceful motivation to move to another country. I think that makes a big difference. In a sense, it's a life and death issue. So it's not optional. And I think we will face more refugees due to climate change and other reasons as well. So they come to Turkey not to settle down in Turkey, but they come here before they go to their host countries, which most of the cases is America, Canada, Germany. Those are the Western countries that they want to go.
I think it's an important distinction you've made, that really what makes a refugee not an immigrant is choice. So in most of these cases, it seems that you're saying people have had to leave. There's not been a choice for them. And so even in the fact that they've been forced out of their places, it seems like that's got to be causing a certain level of significant trauma for them.
Exactly. That's what we are facing. Those people, even before they left their country, that's concern of safety. Especially when you're married, when you have kids, when you have parents that you leave, that concern is still alive and still very traumatizing.
Well, you've earned a reputation in the broader global work of refugee care as an innovator. In particular, you're often asked to teach others who work with refugees how to use art and expressive activity to promote healing and to promote community. I'm curious, how did you become an art-focused healer?
Art has been a part of my life since my childhood, and I always enjoyed playing and creating and just like cutting stuff and things like that. But especially through teenage years, it has been very helpful to manage my stress, and then I enjoyed doing it. And one thing about art is art does not judge, and art's language is unique. I practice freedom through art. There was a time in my life, Forrest, that I was going through some very flat, I think, what I can say is in my life that nothing really started to make meaning to me anymore. And I was ready for a new chapter in my life. And I couldn't find joy in what I was doing. So basically I said, okay, let's sit down and really think about what is next. And then so I just sat down and I said so what do I have in mind? What do I want to do? What am I good at? What's the purpose of life? That existential crisis, it doesn't only happen at the teenage years, as you know. It happens in life many times. So I sat down and said okay, I love what I love. I love God. And that's number one. And number two, I love serving people. So I'm striving to practice generosity and concern for others. That gives meaning to my life. It's inspired by the love and compassion I already received from God. So it's not something that I'm generating. It's already in me. So I'm a wounded healer. So, okay. So I have 3 sentences. I said, I love God, I want to serve people, and I love art. Here's your challenge, God. Combine those 3 together.
Of course, when we became friends 25 years ago now, you were just coming into these new understandings about how art was at the center of your calling as a healer. And even at that early stage, you had a lot of wisdom to offer about engaging in creative activity to get through personal struggles and even to remind ourselves about who we are in the midst of difficult times. And honestly, in the first couple of years after moving to Istanbul, I was really distracted by how much I missed being home and by feeling out of place much of the time. By your example, you encouraged me at that time to use expressive forms to find ways to deal with my anxiety and my longing for home. For me, creating gardens is my go-to art form. So that became my medium for trying to deal with my sense of displacement. Gardening was the thing I loved doing best. It was at the heart of my identity, and so it was the practice that ended up connecting me most deeply to place. So at the time, I lived in a 3-story Greek house with a tiny, tiny little space in the back for a garden, but it was full of garbage and junk, and you couldn't really go into it. People just kept throwing stuff into it. There were some beautiful trees back there, but everything else was just garbage. So I remember I spent one spring hauling away all the stuff, all the detritus and scrap metal and glass, etc., and then got some cobblestones and made a small patio, and then planted flowers around the side. For me, that was just such a healing work in itself. But what made that work really come home in terms of its impact on me was that next summer, I was working with street children. And so we would go to the urban areas, feed some of the kids. We'd take them to the beach sometimes just to give them a break from their really difficult lives. Several times we actually came to spend time in the garden. It was a small garden. It was very crowded when they were there, but it was a place of peace and refuge, not just for me, but I was able to offer that to them as well. So we would have a little barbecue there, and we'd eat a meal and maybe afterwards go down to the sea to swim. But for me, that was really important. That was a breakthrough for me, realizing that I didn't have to spend all my energy longing for a place that I wasn't going back to anytime soon, but able to reconnect myself to home, but most importantly, to share it with community. That was really significant. But I don't think I made that connection until just now in this conversation. It's like, oh yeah, that's where it came from, right? I totally get what you're talking about.
I remember that garden, by the way.
Over the years of our friendship, you've told many stories about the displaced people you serve. And one thing that's always fascinated me about these stories is that there seems to be a common theme of being out of place. My impression has been that much of the suffering that they are experiencing has a lot to do, of course, with being separated from the land that was once a part of their identity. In a way, when they experience being torn away from their homelands, it's almost like they carry that wound with them then, wherever they go in the world. In your experience, how would you describe the importance of people's relationship to place? And what are the costs to that person when that relationship is broken?
Place is very much connected with our identity, our belonging, and who we are. And it's a place where we create our stories and our memories. And shared moments really give meaning to our lives and help us to identify who we are. So they go through another grieving period. Now they're out of their country. They don't know their future. They are hopeless. They are basically alone. Loneliness is one of the biggest issues because losing familiarity, safety, security. Yes, they were not safe there. But let me put it this way. Let's say, Forrest, someone raised up in a domestic violence home, but still that is home. That's your normal. You belong. That's why I sometimes call it the country can be a bad parent. For refugees, their countries are bad parents. That's why when you talk with them, they try to defend their countries. So you have to be very careful if you talk with a refugee saying something negative. They take it so personal and start to defend. The cost of being out of place is loss of connection with self, with others, and loss of familiarity. Because the sadness, the grief is so heavy, they prefer really not to remember the past. They try to focus on the future. They skip past, present, but they keep on looking at the future. But what happens when you cut yourself from your past? You create another vulnerability. Because now, on your journey to the future for a better life, you're losing who you are, where you're coming from, what your culture is, the things, the memories, because they are so heavy to remember. But you're missing a very important part of who you are as well. So, in the groups, the question I sometimes ask is, what did you bring with you that was not necessary? So that's an interesting question to ask for us, because of course everyone's trying to collect some paperwork and some things like that. But they said like, I brought necklace from my grandma. And then so I said, tell me about it. Then they shared my grandma was a beautiful woman. And then this is what we did. This is how she treated me. So I try to honor those past experiences and let them really see that actually by not remembering the past and honoring the past, you are losing a very big chunk of who you are. And it's beautiful. Your culture is beautiful. Your past, you have some good memories. Please take them with you when you go to the third country, because those are the memories that makes you who you are. Don't leave them behind. And then when I say that, you see their eyes just start saying like, yeah, there are some good memories too. We can cherish them. We can remember. It's okay. It's good.
Tell us about some of the creative work you've done.
And most of the time, we are very afraid to express ourselves. There are many reasons. One is we simply don't know what we feel. That's what I call emotional literacy. You don't know what's going on. You call it everything stress, or you're angry. There's no other, words for your emotions. And then the other thing is, if you just share that you're so afraid that you will be judged, that people will think that you're crazy, you're not good enough. This is the way that I explain in the groups. And I said, like, when you go through difficult times, they don't come easy. Art's language is very kind and non-judgmental. And we were born as artistic being. Maybe we don't practice it, but that's our DNA. Like a muscle, over the years, if you work with it, it's there. But if you don't work with it, it's still there. Art has been a great tool to serve refugees. When they start to express themselves without the fear of judgment, they really start to understand themselves as well. For example, one of the most common ones is when we start, we kind of explore safety, because that's the basic human need. We need to feel safe. So, but especially when you come out of the country, which is not safe, they can't remember what safe feels like because they are not used to it. What is safe and how can we trust? And those are the concepts that I introduced at the first session. I bring my animal toys, and when they see, they start to smile a little bit. And then they just said, will we play? I said, yeah, we will play, because that's the milestone for creativity. That's the milestone for creating something new. We need to give room to play and see different possibilities. So I bring the animals, and then I said, okay, there is no mistake in art. That's my motto. I always say that. You can never, ever mess up with an art project. So I want you to give permission to yourself to try and have fun. If you're a kid, you don't need permission because that comes natural. But as an adult, you have to acknowledge that. And that's actually one of the guidelines for the group. So I give permission to myself to have fun. And especially when you go through trauma, when you go through difficult times, you don't give permission to yourself to even have some breaks. So during that time, it's acknowledged. It is a guideline. It's like there are no mistakes in art. And then I give myself permission to have fun. And I'm a creative human being. And that normalcy in the midst of that traumatized waiting period of time as a refugee is just like an oasis for them. The way that they prepare to come to the sessions, they wear their best dresses as much as they can, do some little makeup here and there. One of the very common things that they say, it feels like normal here, like there's life here. Going back to the example, they pick the animal and put it on the paper and said like, okay, I want you to create a habitat for your animal to live. That feels safe. So basically, instead of going through with words saying like, what is safe for me and what do I need for safe, this and that, it is very highly cognitive level. In a traumatized person, it's kind of no, they can't. By the way, one of the most common animals that they pick is, for example, cow. And then cow, it can be bear, horse. There's so many different animals I have. So for example, cow is very common because being useful means a lot for the refugees. And especially if they're parents, they just think about how to provide for their kids all the time. And that's another reason. Cow is beautiful to be able to provide. So they just put the animal and create a habitat that they feel safe so they can explore what safety is for them through this very basic, simple activity. And after that, I just asked them, okay, so please write down a couple words describing your animal. And then they do. And I said, okay, give a title to your artwork that really conceptualize the whole idea. Then they come up with a phrase or a word. And I said, okay, can you also write down a couple needs of the animal? And in such a simple activity, Forrest, I got so many information from the needs, from the definitions, from the artwork that they create. And then so they kind of be at the moment, stop worrying about past or future. They're at present. And, being present is number one therapeutic environment that you need to create for a person. So after that, I give them a chance to express themselves and introduce their animals and their artwork to the group. My bear lives in da-da-da and needs da-da-da and, definition da-da-da. So basically, that person is introducing himself in the group in a very playful way, but in a very direct way. Sometimes at the end, we have those aha moments for us. Hey, wait a minute, that cow is me. Me is the cow. And after that, they remember each other with the animals. Like, hey, cow, what's up? Hey, bear, what are you up to? I even know two guys, for us. They still call each other with their animals. After 6 years, I think. Then they started that relationship in that group. And then they still continue. And now both of them are in the third country.
There's a lot going on, obviously, in the Middle East these days, and you are currently developing a curriculum that trains healers. Tell us about that curriculum and what you're trying to accomplish through it.
This has been in my heart for a long time, and finally I found a chance to just sit down and really write down my experience and what worked in the field with different groups, with refugee groups for North African and Middle Eastern. And because when I started to go on the field, there were so many things in my mind. I thought, that's it will work out. And that never did. And it was surprising because what you think and what you face on the field totally can be different. The whole idea is creating 3 modules and combining them together at the end, creating this manual for the facilitators from the communities. So those people will be trained in 1.5 years, and they will be a part of their community, supported by me and various experts. And then we will do this, supervision and follow-up. And then 3 modules training in 1.5 years. So the idea is really equipping people in the community willing to take up this challenge. So those people, they're not psychiatrists, they're not psychologists, they're not social workers. Those are the people who are willing to go. And then, first of all, we plan them to try for themselves. And if they see that is something that can be helpful, we will encourage them to use it. Those people are actually recognized by the community, accepted as leader, and has influence. So it's not a person out of the blue. So the first module is all about stabilization. For example, habitat activity is one of the first activities from the first module. Then in the second module, now we have some safe ground. We're okay. Share your story. Would you like to share your story with me? What is your story? Because everyone has a story. I'm here and present, and I just want to listen. So creating that safe environment for the person to process the story, narrate the story, start to rewrite the story, and see the different possibilities, that brings us to the third module, which is creating a future together. You're stabilized. Now you tell the story. So what is next? Let's talk about the possibilities. Let's talk about the future. There are things that you're still in control. There are things that you can still change if you're willing to. So what do you need? Let's think about this. Let's have vision. So that's where hope kicks in. That's where gratitude kicks in. Let's create a collage, let's say, together. Let's think about 10 years later. What kind of a life do you want to? Where do you want to be? What do you want to see? Daring to dream again. Daring to be alive again. And that's the program. I'm very excited.
It seems like in some ways you're really building resilience. I would imagine that in a refugee situation, it's hard to have hope for the future, maybe even fearful to look at the future when you don't know what's coming next. But it also sounds like you're giving them permission to dream, permission to hope again. And that in this case, like collage, for example, collage about your future seems like an important way to express that, which again is kind of indirect, which I hear that's one of the points is helping them to find ways to maybe walk around the fear, walk around the resistance to those things in a different format through creative work. Is that what you find when your groups are done? Do people generally seem more optimistic about what's to come?
They are, because they see that they're not alone. Loneliness is very dark among refugee community.
One thing that's become clear is that what you're often using expressive forms for is to make the invisible visible, right? Taking the things that are hidden and bringing them out into the open so that people can acknowledge them, face them, talk about them, whatever needs to be done, whatever healing looks like.
Exactly, Forrest. That's very well put, because it's what art does, makes things visible so that you know what you're talking about. For example, how we are doing, how can we know that? If I ask you, Forrest, how are you doing? And most of the answer is, I'm fine, or I'm not good, or so-so. Many people have very limited, dictionary. How are you can be the most simple question, or it can be the hardest one, depending on who is asking and what you want to share. I just want to encourage them to explore it. If you were a tree, I want you to imagine, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be right now? So we start to act like a tree. We start playful. And I want you to see, so those are your branches. Are they up or down? Are they wide or narrow? Are you a big tree, small tree? Are you a fruit tree? Think about the climate. Think about the season. Think about your roots. Think about your health. And are there animals living on you? Everyone can draw a tree. And everyone can recognize at least 5-10 different trees, even if you're from the city. They draw trees. And they define trees. What does your tree need? Sun. What else? So I just asked them to come up with some ideas. I said, what does sun do to a tree? So receive personal answers. Let's say that the person says, it energizes the tree. Okay. So what energizes you? What gives you life? From there, it's so easy to go deeper and create awareness. What kind of a tree are you? Instead of asking, how are you?
And giving them language with which to express that.
Exactly. And then they are so proud. So it is that beautiful and simple. And from there, if I want to go to community, I said, okay, we see lots of trees around. So what is next? So I asked them, do you think those trees can form a forest? Can we try? And then we take the tree pictures and put it on the floor. I said, put them in a way that's pleasing to your eyes. And then they put the trees on the ground. And I say, I want everyone to be pleased where they're rooted, where they're located. You're responsible for your tree. If you want to be a little bit far away from forest, that's okay. And there's room for that. We're not trying to glue people together. That's not the idea. So people just put their trees on the ground. I said, okay, so what do you see? What do you think the pros and cons to be a forest? Because there are some, so what are they? So they start to discuss. But I haven't seen anyone saying, no forest. Everyone somehow they realize the need for connection. Conversations start to happen. For example, one tree just doesn't have fruits and he feels the urge to bear fruit, but he's not in a place. So in another tree, you see lots of fruits. And that cherry guy just says, hey, don't worry about it. I have many cherries. Come get some cherries. And those supportive conversations really start to happen in the group immediately. Because that's another miracle. You see that gentleness, trying to support each other. Whatever they have, they want to share. It is so beautiful to see. And that's how community starts to happen.
You know, I've been to Turkey many times, but moved there in 1999 after the earthquake in Turkey. So some of the first things I was doing was working in places for helping people who were victims of the earthquake. But the stories that I was hearing others recounting from those folks was actually a story of being refugees. Even though they were in their own country, their place now is destroyed. Whole villages and small cities were destroyed. And the trauma was still there. Many of them did have to move to other places. But so many people immediately began to talk about, how do we rebuild here? Even though it might have been simpler and easier to relocate to a place that wasn't destroyed by the earthquake, the impulse was, no, we have to build back here in this place because this is home. So really powerful to me to hear those stories.
That's a sound of resilience. Let's try again. Let's not give up. This is our land. This is where we belong. This is where we will continue to write the story. It is, that kind of a rootedness in those places. Yeah, I heard those stories a lot too.
The attachment to place is so powerful.
Yeah, it is.
The Earth Keepers podcast is an expression of Circlewood, an organization committed to cultivating a more ecologically conscious faith. For more information about the podcast, or to learn about the ways you can support this work, go to our website at earthkeepers.online. You can contact us by leaving a voicemail through the podcast website, or by emailing us at earthkeepers@circlewood.online. I am Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. James Amadon is our executive producer. Our content editor and researcher is Colleen Meggerly, and our sound engineer is Dave Wolfers. Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director, and Forrest Reed is the composer of our original music. Thank you for listening, friends, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earth Keepers podcast.